Welcome to Office 365 for Nonprofits, a do-it-yourself overview. My name is Becky Wiegand and I'm your host here at TechSoup. And we will be joined today by Sam Chenkin and Ebony Taylor from Tech Impact. To give you a little bit of background about us, my name is Becky and I'm an interactive events producer at TechSoup. I've been here since 2008, so about 6 years. And prior to that, I spent about a decade in Washington, D.C. and here in California working for a series of small nonprofits where I was the accidental techie, having to figure out how to upgrade our computers, fix problems, run online campaigns, pick out cloud-based tools, kind of everything under the sun, which is often the case of staff at smaller organizations. So I'm happy to be here at TechSoup where I can provide webinars like this on a regular basis to help you hopefully make the best decisions for your nonprofit or library. We're also joined by Sam Chenkin, who is the Director of Solution Development at Tech Impact. They are an organization, a nonprofit based in Pennsylvania, and he works with Office 365 and a whole host of IT support on a day-to-day basis with nonprofits around the country. And he'll be sharing his expertise on how they run do-it-yourself upgrades to Office 365. We'll also be hearing from Ebony Taylor, who's a project coordinator at Tech Impact, and she is their go-to expert on all things Office 365. So hopefully in today's 90-minute webinar we'll have time to answer most of your questions about Office 365. And really the point of today's webinar is to help you assess whether doing it yourself will work for you or not. And so some of the topics we cover may be pretty technical. We did ask in the registration page that if you had not viewed the introduction webinar that we did on Office 365 or the Office 365 Is It Right for Your Nonprofit webinar, that you may want to check those out as well. We'll include links to those in the follow-ups in case you haven't seen them. But they give a little bit more of an introductory level overview of Office 365. Today we'll be going a little bit more in depth in what actually would be entailed with the upgrade. If you try and do it yourself, you may be well equipped to do it yourself. You may find that you can do parts of it yourself, or you may find that it's just way beyond your capacity. So this webinar hopefully will help you assess whether it really is worth it for you to do it and give you the guidance and steps on how to move forward. You'll also see assisting us in the chat window Ali Bezdikian and John Rush, who are both here at TechSoup with me. And Ali is one of our interactive events and video producers, and she has created some Office 365 resources on how to access the donated products. And so she can help answer those questions. And John works on our client services team helping validate nonprofits for the donations of Office 365. So they're both there to help grab your questions, whatever they may be, throughout the webinar. So even if you don't get a response right away, they'll be there to capture those and help answer them along with our presenters. A look at today's agenda. It is a full 90 minutes, so we hope that you can stay for the whole thing. And if not, you can view any portion that you may miss at the archive email that you receive later today. We'll do a quick introduction of TechSoup and Tech Impact, talk about what Office 365 is for anybody who may not know what it all consists of. We'll talk about the donations that Microsoft is making available to nonprofits as of this past fall. And then we'll talk about how to sign up. And then we'll go over some of the integration processes for Office 365 with on-premise servers and talk about the migration of each of those pieces, Exchange, Lync, SharePoint, and OneDrive. Then we'll cover a little bit of information about the do-it-yourself workshops that are available if you need a little bit more guidance but want to go the route of doing it yourself. And we'll share some additional resources. And we'll have some Q&A at the end, but we'll also try to raise some questions up throughout. So who is TechSoup? We are a 501c3 nonprofit, and we are working towards a day when every nonprofit, public library, charity, foundation, any organization that does good works has the technology, resources, and products they need to meet their potential. We've been around since 1987, having served more than 200,000 charitable organizations with 11 million software and hardware donations in 60 countries around the world. in those 3 organizations that I worked with before joining TechSoup staff, I was a TechSoup user. So I've benefited personally from these at small nonprofits, and I hope that this event today will help you learn how you can benefit from them as well. A little bit about what's new at TechSoup. We've begun offering consulting services, and Tech Impact is one of the consulting services that we work with and that offers donations to users at nonprofits. And we also have most recently added Windows 8.1 and the latest QuickBooks. These are just a sampling of some of the different products available to you through the donation programs, from a whole spate of corporate donor partners like Microsoft, Cisco, Symantec, and many, many others who generously donate their technology for social good. So I'm going to go ahead and invite Sam to join us on the line to give us a little bit of background about Tech Impact, and then we'll jump into the topic at hand. So Sam, welcome to the program. We're glad to have you.
Thanks. It's good to be here. Hello everyone. So today we're going to be providing an overview of a do-it-yourself process for migrating to Office 365. And I'm hoping you'll come away with a general understanding of the process, and also some questions, and hopefully some awareness of where your strengths and weaknesses lie as they relate to getting to Office 365, so you can figure out the best path for your organization to get there. So on the line today we also have Ebony Taylor. Ebony Taylor is Project Coordinator here at Tech Impact. She does a lot of our actual day-to-day implementations for organizations that sort of work with us, and we do the migration to Office 365. So Ebony is going to be fielding some questions in the chat and as we go through the presentations. My name again is Sam Chankin. I'm Director of Solution Development at Tech Impact. I've been here 6 years, a long time actually. And I'm really here to help nonprofits spend a little bit less time worrying about their infrastructure, a little bit more time worrying about the work that you're doing, and also hopefully figure out some ways that technology can really help you do your work more effectively. Okay, so again, Tech Impact is a nonprofit organization. We're a 501c3. We work exclusively with other nonprofit organizations, and our mission is to help you serve the world a little bit better through worrying less about some things and by having access to better technologies, both. We do a lot of different things, but that's not the purpose of this webinar. So you can find out more information about us at our website, or we have a bunch of offerings on TechSoup. Okay, so let's dive right in. I want to provide a little bit of an overview of what Office 365 is, just to sort of set a baseline. So let's start here. We have a poll. I'd like to learn a little bit more about what your experience is with Office 365. So if you could let us know if you're already using Office 365, if you don't know what it is, and sort of which pieces you are using and are not using. This is really, really helpful information for me in figuring out how to target the webinar. Also, I really like it when people have to fill in poll questions, because it means I know you're paying attention. Okay, so that's not a bad response rate. So it looks like most people really are not using Office 365 at all, but almost everyone seems to have an idea of what it is. A lot of people are already using Exchange Online. So I think this is going to be a really good webinar for most of the people here. We're going to cover everything. And for those that have already been using or already in Exchange Online, hopefully we can fill in some of the gaps about the other sections and maybe cover some of those on-premise integrations. Okay. So what is Office 365? It's a confusing marketing term. It doesn't really mean much. But basically it's a term that Microsoft uses for all of their cloud services that are actually used by end users. Right? So all of your end users are going to use email. They're going to use Outlook Web Access or Outlook, and so they're going to be consumers of that technology that Microsoft is providing, and so that fits under the Office 365 cloud. That was a bad word. The Office 365 sort of brand, umbrella. So for your purposes, Office 365 is server-based versions of many of the same products you're already using. Exchange is Exchange Online, Lync is Lync Online, SharePoint, SharePoint Online, and OneDrive is its own little thing. But basically the idea here is that Microsoft is managing all of it for you. So I'm just going to take a minute and I'm going to go through each of these different products because that's sort of how we're dividing up the webinar. And I'm going to give you a little overview of what's included with Office 365, and then I'm going to do a really, really short 30-second demo just to give you some context. I really believe that sometimes you need to see it in order to know what's going on. So let's start with Exchange Online. Exchange Online is email hosting, right? They host your email in the cloud. When you're using Exchange Online as part of Office 365, every user gets 50 gigabytes of storage space for the free licenses, the E1, E2 licenses. You can share calendars and mailboxes. It works exactly the same way as it works with an on-premise Exchange server. So let's do a little bit of a very short demo here. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so here we can see Outlook right here. This is standard Outlook. We use Office 365. I use the normal Outlook client, and it is connected up into the cloud. Nothing special there. If we take a look up at in the cloud, we also have Outlook Web Access, right? So this is, again, Exchange Online. So everything here is Exchange Online. We can also do things like share calendars. Oops, I'll do it right here. So you can see here's my calendar here, and I can access other people's shared calendars as well. And contact lists are also included as part of Office 365. Again, I can do all these things through Outlook that's installed on my computer, or I can do the same things through my mobile phone. It's all part of Office 365. So nothing really changed there. Lync Online is a web conferencing and instant messaging platform. You can do video chat. And you can also conduct meetings. So some of the functionality, I mean, it's not as full-blown as ReadyTalk, right? But you can do things like invite people to participate in the meeting and share your screen and share audio. Here I have the Lync client. And you can see here different people in my office and whether or not they are online or offline. And I can do instant messaging with people. And it's not really much to demonstrate there. Lync Online also allows me to do some things about awareness. So if I go to Outlook, and unfortunately, well, when you're looking at someone who's inside of your organization, you will be able to see in Outlook and in SharePoint whether or not that person is already online. And I'll be able to show that to you in a little bit more detail later. Okay, SharePoint Online is a web-based file collaboration and storage tool. It can replace what you're already using in terms of your P drive, right? Your public drive or your company drive. This can share that. Think kind of Google Docs in terms of that. There are also web-based versions of Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and OneNote, so you can edit those documents and create those documents in the cloud without needing that version installed on your computer. Or you can edit them on your local machine. I'll show you that. There's a lot of complex stuff around managing permissions. You can set up permissions however you need, and you can share with external users. So if you want to invite people who aren't in your organization to collaborate on a document, you can invite them to collaborate on that document. SharePoint also allows you to put calendars and contact lists and some other things all in one place, sort of like an intranet. And you can do some limited local file synchronization like Dropbox. So just to sort of give you a brief overview, again, I'm really not trying to dig into all the functionality, but I'd like to give you an idea of how stuff works. This is SharePoint Online. You can see the web interface. I'm in our trainings and webinars site right now, and you can see that if I click on the document list, everything's in folders, right? So I can go to the webinars folder, and I can open up any of these folders and find a document. If I click on this document, it's going to open up in the web-based version of the application. So this is PowerPoint Online. And then I can always edit that version in my locally installed version of PowerPoint as well. So here it's actually contacting the server, and it just opened up that document. And this document lives in SharePoint, and when I save it, it saves back up to SharePoint. You can also store other kinds of information. So if we go to our home site here in SharePoint, we have this paid time off calendar. And this is a standard calendar that I can add to Outlook if I want. And you can do week and month and those kinds of views. So you can store a lot of different things in SharePoint in one place, all accessible through a web browser. Okay, phew. The last thing I want to demonstrate is OneDrive. OneDrive is sort of a My Documents folder in the cloud. You get 25 gigabytes of storage per user included in the licensing. And you can sync with your local desktop. So if I open up this file here, here's my OneDrive. You can see I already have a couple of documents here. I could create a new document and save it. And it's actually going to sync that document back up to SharePoint. So this works the same way as Dropbox. My OneDrive is also accessible inside of SharePoint. If I click on OneDrive for Business, or on OneDrive here we have these documents. So these documents are sort of my documents. They're not shared with the whole organization. So SharePoint is for shared documents. OneDrive is for your personal documents. And again, you get that file synchronization for offline access. Okay, so let me stop sharing my screen. And I hope that was a little bit helpful. And let's dig into some of the other things about Office 365. Again, the purpose of this webinar is really not to get into the nitty-gritty of what Office 365 offers and doesn't offer, but I wanted to just give you a little bit of an overview. With Office 365, you do get phone support. If you want it, you can call them. They will only talk to your administrator, right? They're not going to talk to your end users, but they will help you get issues resolved. And you also get continuous upgrades, so you don't have to worry anymore about upgrading your upgrading out Exchange to the next version or upgrading SharePoint to the next version. Microsoft does that for you. And in Office 365, you get all of the information first, right? Or you get all the updates first. So they update Office 365 before they update the server-side versions of those products. There's a little more technical information in the slides about how Office 365 is structured, but I think you can take a look through the information yourself for that. Okay, so I want to just take a minute and do a little bit of questioning here. I'd like to know how many of you are using Windows XP 2007 or 2010, just to sort of get an idea of who is ready to upgrade to Office 365. Okay, so let's take a look here. So Office 365 requires Office 2010 and Windows Vista or newer. Windows XP is officially not supported anymore, so, or maybe I guess it's a week away. So if you have Windows XP machines, you will need to upgrade before going to Office 365. You will also need to upgrade if you are using Office 2007. You cannot use Office 2007 with Office 365. Office 2010 will work, but it's not a great idea if you want to use SharePoint. So if you're interested in using SharePoint, you really should be upgraded to Office 2013. So hopefully this gives all of you an idea. This is one of the downsides of being in a constantly updating platform, right? Microsoft makes decisions about what they're supporting and what they're not supporting. And they're going to sort of drag you along, kicking and screaming with it. So just keep that in mind.
You know, it's interesting, Sam, just to jump in quickly. Lisa and Sean both pointed out that we didn't include 2013 on that, so I apologize for the omission. If you have 2013, then yes, you're current. So we should have provided that option as well. So thank you for pointing that out. For those of you who are still on XP machines, we did a webinar last week that some of you may have participated in that was called Beyond XP that had options for upgrading and mentioned some of Office 365 as well as one option. So we can include a link to that in case you weren't on it and you want to know what your options are for getting off of XP. Go ahead, great. Sam, take it away. Just a little interjection there.
No, that's great. So just to reiterate, you have to be on Windows Vista or newer. You have to be on Office 2010 or newer. And especially if you're using SharePoint, you really should be on 2013. The reason for that is that the integration with on-premise, with your locally installed version of Office, like if you open up Word, it makes a lot more sense for users with Office 2013 than with Office 2010. With Office 2013, you can click File, Open, SharePoint, and it's just right there. With 2010, you kind of have to go through the web interface in order to do it, and it's a little bit clunky. So 2013 is strongly recommended. Any broadband internet connection should be fine, particularly if you're just using the email portion of Office 365. If you just want to move your email up, you can do that with just about any kind of connection because all that stuff is sort of cached locally on your computer, and so you're only transmitting new messages. But if you have a T1 or a DSL connection, you should really do some testing before you try to move to Lync or SharePoint or OneDrive online. Those are higher bandwidth applications, right? So just keep that in mind. All this stuff works pretty well over a 4G connection. So if you do have roaming users, that's pretty reliable. Okay, so let's pause for a minute before we move on to some of the benefits for nonprofit organizations of Office 365 for questions related to what it is.
Yeah. We've had a few come in, so let's try and get through a couple of them right now so that everybody's on the same page with understanding some of the benefits. So Morris asks, is it true that you don't have to have the Office product loaded locally since you can use the online versions? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
That's absolutely true. There are online versions of Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and OneNote, and then obviously of Outlook because there's Outlook Web Access. So of those, if that's all you're using, then you don't need to have anything installed locally. You can do everything through the web interface.
Great. And then we will talk a little bit more later on about the different options available with the E1 and E3 options that were mentioned earlier by Sam in brief. We'll cover a little bit about what the benefit might be if you choose the E3 version, which has a cost to it. We also have a question from, let's see, where did it go? Sorry, we have a question from Alan asking, does Office 365 allow simultaneous collaboration on a doc like Google Docs would?
Yes, it absolutely does. There are some restrictions. For Excel, everyone has to be in the web app. You can't have some people on the local desktop app and some in the in the web one, and it works differently depending on the product, but it absolutely is supported. And that's something we could talk to you more about in detail, or you could find that information online.
Great. And then we'll just do one more, and don't worry, we're capturing all of the questions that are being asked, and we'll have other pauses throughout the webinar to continue asking them. But Ron has asked, how much share space do you get? Is that the 50 gig you mentioned?
So there's a lot of different sort of storage limits. Every user, with the free licenses, every user gets a 50 gigabyte personal mailbox, right? That's just for email and calendars and contacts. Then they get 25 gigabytes of storage for OneDrive. That's their personal My Documents folder. The shared storage in SharePoint for sort of shared documents works differently. You get 10 gigabytes as an organization and then 500 megabytes per user. And you can purchase additional space for 20 cents per gigabyte, which is way cheaper than it would cost to back up an on-premise file server online.
Great. And you know what, before we move off of this, let me just ask these two other questions that I hope will be quick. Scott just asked, how fast of an internet speed do you really need for Office 365? And I know you mentioned a little bit about Exchange Online and the DSL, but do you have speed requirements at all? I mean,
it depends. It depends on the size of your organization. If you're under 100 employees, a standard Comcast or Fios, any kind of cable or fiber optic connection is going to be fine. But it depends on your specific scenario and what you're looking to do.
Okay.
So I'm sorry,
and then one
that's
last quick question. No, that's okay. It really does depend. And so I guess you really need to assess which programs you might be most interested in using. And if there are those high bandwidth ones that you mentioned, then broadband internet might be your best bet. Barb asked, will Office 365 – oh wait, that's the wrong one. Sorry, Barb, I will answer your question in just a moment. But we had one other one that I was going to ask quickly that was, where did it go? Maybe I'll need to wait, but it just disappeared on me. So let's go ahead and move on. But we are capturing all the questions, and I know that Ebony and other folks on the back end are working to answer them in chat as well. So even if we don't verbally ask them, hopefully we'll get most of them answered. So thank you, Sam. Let's go ahead and move forward.
Sounds good. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the benefits of Office 365 for nonprofits. So from my perspective, the biggest benefit is just getting rid of the server that you have right now, dramatically reducing your management overhead. And many organizations can actually get rid of all their servers by moving to Office 365. Really all that's left is sort of Active Directory for authentication and databases that you have. And many organizations have already moved their databases to the cloud and don't actually need Active Directory. So this is a really, really big benefit. Even if you can't move everything to the cloud all at once, it's a really, really important first step. It'll help build momentum in your organization for getting everything else up to the cloud. In particular, Exchange servers are very expensive. SharePoint servers are very expensive. So those are good targets to move to the cloud to reduce your cost. Another big one is getting access to the latest features, right? So I don't know how many of you, I'll ask later, but sort of what version of Exchange you're on. If you're on Exchange, it's a big pain to upgrade. You have to buy a new server, all the rest, and not having to worry about that anymore and getting access to the latest features will really let you move with the times and get access to the same tools that major corporations are using. And also take advantage of some of the decreases in storage costs. So getting access to increased storage. Finally, getting access to tools that you're just not going to have on-premise because they're too hard to set up. Right? Few organizations use SharePoint because it's so complicated, and the same goes with Lync. Right? But if Microsoft is managing that whole infrastructure for you, it suddenly becomes accessible. Okay, also much better accessibility. Everything is designed to work on a mediocre Internet connection with distributed groups. Right? So these old technologies with the P drive, these CIFS shares that everyone's using, where you map a network drive, that stuff is not designed to work over an Internet connection, and it doesn't work over an Internet connection. Office 365 is designed to do that. I mean, any cloud solution is, but we're talking about Office 365. And so being able to move these key parts of your infrastructure up to the cloud is really, really a big benefit in terms of accessibility. I just want to point out here, Microsoft has a 99.9% uptime SLA. It's financially backed. What that means is that they will pay you money, they will refund you if they don't meet their SLA in a month. That obviously doesn't mean anything if you're not paying them. But it does mean that they do have a financial interest in keeping services up and running, even if you're not going to recoup that money, other organizations will. Okay, so I'd like to know a little bit about what you are using right now, mostly for email, because that's one of the biggest pieces that we're going to be talking about today. So if you could just take a moment to answer this survey. Great. So far this is really exactly what I was expecting in terms of most people using Exchange server. Wait to just get a few more responses. This is really, really helpful information for me. Okay. So most people are using an on-premise Exchange server, with many others using other hosted POP or IMAP providers. So again, this is more or less what we expect. This matches the makeup of organizations that come to us and ask us to help them with their Office 365 migration. Relatively few people are on Office 365, which is a little bit confusing to me based on that first poll, but hopefully that will become clear soon. The good news is that most of the stuff I'm going to be talking about today pertains to migrating from an Exchange server, and the rest of it pertains to migrating from POP or IMAP providers. And we'll touch briefly on Google Apps. So hopefully this will be good information for you. I just want to give you a little bit of context of Office 365 related to anything else. 365 is not the right solution for everyone. The purpose of this webinar is not to help you make that decision. It's to help you get to Office 365. But I want to mention this, right? So basically the feature set is the same between Office 365 and Google Apps. Or you can get pretty much the same functionality just by going out and saying, okay, I want Dropbox and I want Zoho and I want these other applications. You can sort of get the same thing. And Office 365 does have some weaknesses. Right? The file synchronization functionality is nowhere near as good as Dropbox, at least not yet. And there's a lot of complexity if you want to integrate it with your on-premise servers, which we'll go over. On the other hand, Office 365 offers by far the smallest transition for your staff. It's familiar tools, but they're in the cloud. right? So very, very easy change for them. And a lot of really good centralized control and management, and relatively easy migration, particularly from Exchange Server, particularly versus Google Apps. So I just wanted to offer this context. Again, I would really encourage you to do the research to figure out whether or not Office 365 is going to be the best thing for your organization. I'm not trying to answer that question for you now, but make sure you know what you're getting into. So before we get into signing up, I wanted to stop and see if there are any questions related to benefits for nonprofits.
Sure. We have a bunch of people, lots and lots of questions, so thank you. And I'm sorry you can't see one another's questions because there's a lot of great ones in there. So a couple of people have asked questions about backup, which I know you're planning to cover a little bit later, but they're wondering if there's a way to easily back up SharePoint, or if you move your email to Office 365's email hosting, is there a way to then extract it back out if you want to go back to using the Exchange server or having it on-premise? So a little bit about that.
That's a really, really good question. And I did a webinar with TechSoup a while ago where I covered some of this stuff, some of these important questions to ask when picking a cloud vendor. And that's a big one, right? Can you get your data out after the fact? There are third-party tools to pull your data out of SharePoint if you want to do that. It is also possible to connect to SharePoint as sort of a network file share, although it's not reliable enough for end users to use, but it can be used as sort of a last-ditch backup method if you don't want to pay for one of those third-party tools. As far as Exchange goes, if you are using coexistence, which we'll talk about, you can move mailboxes back and forth between an on-premise Exchange server and the cloud pretty seamlessly. If you are not, Microsoft does provide tools to push your email from Office 365 to an on-premise Exchange server, sort of built into the migration tool. And there are lots of third-party tools like MigrationWiz, which we'll talk about, and some others to get that data out of Office 365 in terms of email and into another environment like Google Apps. So the answer is yes, primarily because Microsoft is such a big player that a lot of third-party organizations have sprung up to sort of fill this gap.
Great. We also have a couple of questions about people who are using Mac 2010 and whether they can upgrade, if they are required to upgrade to Office 2013 and there's not a Mac version available of that yet, how would that affect them if they want to start using Office 365? Or can they?
Great. So you can use the latest version of Office for Mac, which I thought was 2011, but I could be wrong there.
You're right. I misspoke. The question was about 2010, but I know there is a 2011 version of it available as well.
Yep. So you can use the latest version of Office for Mac, and it does work. The demo stuff that I showed doesn't apply. There's a separate application called Document Center that lives on the Mac that you use to interact with SharePoint files. And then you use Entourage for Mac, but they are releasing Outlook for Mac in the next version of, it's just going to be Outlook, right? It's pretty similar to the desktop client in the next version of Office. So hopefully this stuff will get a lot better. But actually it works very well with Macs. I've had some really good feedback from organizations who do that.
Great. We had a couple of other questions around video conferencing. So before we move forward, Linda asks, for video conferencing, can people who are not using Office 365 participate in the conferences? So can you do it with people who are outside your organization? And on top of that, is there any extra charge for those kind of link calls or hidden costs that people need to be aware of when using link conferencing?
Yeah, so link conferencing is free, but if you want to do like the stuff that we're doing right now where some people are dialed into a phone number and some people are using the audio through ReadyTalk, that stuff costs money with any provider, but with Link too. So that stuff isn't free. But if everyone is using audio in Link, then there is no cost for that. You can do video chat outside of your organization. There are some limitations. I don't know those off the top of my head. I will also say Link is—
Sorry, Sam, was that a can or a can't? Sorry.
You can, but there are some limitations, and I don't know those off the top of my head.
I just wanted to make sure that I heard that right. So you can use it with people outside the org, but with limits. Okay.
Yeah.
Continue what you were saying. Sorry.
Yeah, sure. Link is also not the most mature of the Office 365 product suite. It can be a little bit temperamental, particularly with people outside of your organization. So I would encourage you to vet Link for your specific purposes before diving head in. And that's just some frank feedback based on my significant experience with it with our clients.
Great. Just let's do 2 more questions and then we'll move on. So Aylin asks, what are the third-party companies that are filling the sync and backup gap? Do you have any recommendations of ones that you've seen or used?
I don't remember the SharePoint migration tool. You'll get my email address at the end. You can reach out to me and I'll send it to you. But MigrationWiz is the biggest player for sort of third-party tools to get your data out of Exchange Online.
Great. And then Linnea asks, are there Office 365, is that available for use on iPads? I know we talked about Macs in general, but will they work on iPads?
Yep, it absolutely will. Yeah, all the web-based stuff will work on iPads, and there's also Office Mobile, which you can only get if you have E3 licenses, which we'll go through, but that is available as well.
Okay, and then this is kind of the elephant in the room question always, and I know we talked a little bit about comparing with Google Apps. We have a couple of people saying they're on Google Apps currently, would like to move to Office 365, and a couple of other asking if it's really kind of got identical features, why would we switch? So do you have any recommendations around that for folks who may already be using Google Apps to host?
If you're using Google Apps and you're happy with it, I don't recommend you move. I don't think that's an issue. Normally I don't recommend Google Apps to organizations because we're nonprofits. We don't always like change. And Office 365 is a much smoother transition for end users. But if you're happy with Google Apps, again, the feature set is more or less identical. I don't think there's a really compelling reason to change. So that's the decision you have to make just based on comparing the specific implementation of the features. Right? There's a different interface for interacting with files in SharePoint than there is with Google Drive. And it makes more sense to some people and less sense to other people. The same thing goes with Outlook Web Access versus Gmail. Right? So it's really, both companies have had a long time to catch up to each other in terms of functionality, and it's mostly about different design senses and sort of conceptualizations of different features.
So if somebody though was not happy with Google Apps and they wanted to move to Office 365, is it essentially a similar process from what we'll go through right now on actually making the switch? Would it be similar to what you'd be doing if you're moving from an on-premise to Office 365 as if moving from Google?
It's somewhat similar. I'll make sure to include a mention where it's helpful of how it's going to be different.
Great, thank you. And for folks asking questions, if we haven't gotten them yet, we are still working on getting through and we'll have other pauses to do the same. So let's go ahead and move forward with the next section.
Sounds good. Okay, so we're just going to do a little bit about signing up. This is a very important slide. So there are 2 licenses available to nonprofit organizations. Sooner or later Microsoft is going to make the P professional licenses available. They'll be like P1, P2, P3. Don't do those. Those are not the right ones for you. There's no way to migrate from the professional to the enterprise. So make sure you do the enterprise licenses. The E1/E2 are a free donation from Microsoft. Microsoft calls them E1 in some places and E2 in other places. I don't know why. They used to be separate. Now they're the same. So just know that. That's where you get the 50 gigabytes of mail, Lync, SharePoint, OneDrive, support, all this stuff. E3 licenses are $4.50 a month to nonprofits. They include Office 2013 Professional subscription. Right? So rather than going through TechSoup for your licenses, you can pay this. It's still cheaper to go through TechSoup if this is the only thing you're looking to do. But you get Office 2013 for up to 5 PCs and Macs, and also for up to 5 mobile devices. So there's the Office mobile application, which lets you edit like Excel and documents like that on a mobile device, and that is only accessible if you have an E3 license. There's no other way to get that right now. That'll probably change. You also can get unlimited mailbox sizes along with legal hold capabilities, so to make sure people, you can go back and find messages if you're sued. And also email encryption is all included with E3. There are some other add-ons and stuff that you can get to get similar functionality without paying the full $4.50. I think for $2 a month you can get encryption added without anything else. So just sort of keep that in mind. So those are your available licenses. To get the donations, you're going to sign up for the trial. You're going to sign up for a trial E3 license. And then you're going to pick a domain name, it's sort of a temporary domain name. It's going to start with .onmicrosoft.com. And then you're going to add your domain name and update your DNS records to verify ownership. You add a TXT record for your domain. If that doesn't make any sense to you, you should probably get some help with this part of the process. And then you'll wait, and Microsoft and TechSoup will work in the background to get you verified. And just some important considerations. You can never change your .onmicrosoft.com domain name. You are stuck with it forever. Mostly you won't see it, but it does exist in your SharePoint URL. So we used to be npowerpa, and now our SharePoint URL is npowerpa.onmicrosoft.com, and there's nothing we can do to change it. So be smart about that decision. You also can't change your location when you sign up for the account. That determines where your data centers are. So make sure you make some smart decisions about that. And that's all I had for sign-up considerations.
So I'm going to just jump on quickly and just pop back really quickly because we have a few questions about the E1 versus E3 options here, and just talk quickly about why you might want one versus the other, and to clarify TechSoup's role in this. So the donations of Office 365 are directly through Microsoft, and so the link that we've shared is Microsoft's form to sign up for their free trial. Within the 30 days after that free trial, TechSoup's role is to verify that you're actually an eligible nonprofit, the same way that we do for the TechSoup donation programs or Microsoft donation programs or Cisco or Adobe or the other companies that donate through TechSoup. Our job is to ensure that the organizations they want it to go to are actually in fact eligible to receive it. So that's really the role that TechSoup plays, is just to confirm that, yep, you're eligible. If you're already registered with TechSoup and have used our donation programs before, in particular if you've registered and received Microsoft donations before, that validation can be pretty quick because you're most likely going to be eligible for the Office 365 donations through Microsoft as well. And just to clarify between E1 and E3, so through the Microsoft donation program with TechSoup, we have limits, which you may or may not be aware of, on how many licenses you can request within a 2-year period. So for example, for an operating system license or for Office 2013, you may be limited to 50 licenses. So if you have a staff of 200 that you need to have using Office 365, you may be limited to requesting only those 50, or I'm sorry, to be able to only, I'm not explaining this very well. So if you need Office 2013 installed on your organization's 200 computers, for example, and you can only get 50 of them donated through the TechSoup program within a 2-year period, then this E3 option provides you with that $450 per user per month with the installed version of Office Pro Plus. So that may be you can get your 50 donated license through TechSoup and you own those for perpetuity. And then you can pay that $450 per user per month to get access to the desktop installed version for those other 150 computers if you need that. So just keep that in mind, and that's where it really becomes a good option if you are a larger organization and need more licenses than what you can access for the Office apps that you might want to have installed.
If
so I hope that helps a little bit.
One thing.
Sure, go ahead.
Another benefit of doing it through Office 365 is that all the licensing and upgrading is handled for you through the Office 365 platform. So if you purchase an E3 license and you install it through the Office 365 portal, it's automatically kept up to date. So for organizations that are really distributed, that can be another compelling reason.
Exactly. And you can have a mix of E1 and E3 licenses. So each user is a separate license. So if you have your 50 users that are accessing Office 365 with the E1 donation and they're getting the donated installed product through TechSoup's donation program with Microsoft, and then you have that other 150 computer setup user and you're using the E3 for them, it's okay to mix and match. But again, this is all delivered through Microsoft with Office 365, and TechSoup's role is really just the verification. We're just validating that you're eligible. And so we don't actually have a role in support or helping really manage the tech of it, but we want to make sure that people who can access the donation know how to get it and can access it, because that's part of our mission to make sure that you can get the technology you want. So that's why we're providing events like this, even though we're not directly providing Office 365. It doesn't come through us. So I hope that answers some of the questions. And now let's go ahead and move us forward, and we'll keep working on those questions on the back end. And I saw that John from our client services also just sent out a link that has information about Microsoft eligibility and restrictions if you're not familiar with what the requirements are and what types of organizations can access it. So go ahead, Sam. Let's move us forward. Thanks.
Okay. Just to be clear, you can get more than 50 E1 licenses. It's just that you probably want Office with those, and you can only get 50 of those from TechSoup through the donated program.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, my point was that if you need Office and you're limited or maxed out, then that's when the E3 offers another appealing option for you to save a little bit of money on the subscription.
Okay, great. Okay, so I have a whole nice and detailed and meaty and technical section here on integrating with on-premise servers. I am not so sure if this is helpful information to include in this webinar. So what I'd like to do is I would like to get a little bit of an idea of the size of your organization so that I can figure out whether or not this information is actually helpful. All of this will be distributed in the slides anyway, but just wanted to find out here. Okay, so we have less than 10% of organizations that are over 200 users. We can sort of skip through the results here just to give everyone an idea. So I'm going to mostly skip this section. I'll provide a little bit of detail. You'll get the information in the slides. Everything in this section is stuff that we also include in our in the advanced. Well, we'll go over that later on. Okay, so mostly what I want to encourage you to do is not integrate with on-premise environments. It's almost never a good idea. It requires long-term maintenance of an on-premise Exchange server. It provides very limited benefits. If you are under 100 users, there's absolutely no reason to do this. If you're under 300 users, you probably still shouldn't be doing this. And so I want to urge you to think about this carefully. Basically, the biggest benefit is password synchronization, and I just don't think that's worth it. So if this is something you're interested in, I would encourage you to take a look at the slides afterwards, and then you can reach out. And we have an offering to go through some of these more complex topics themselves too. I do just want to cover the types of integrations that are available because they are going to be helpful later on when we talk about migrating. So there are 3 different integrations that are offered as part of Office 365. One is called directory synchronization, which synchronizes a local Active Directory server to the cloud. That is kind of like if you're going to do any integration, you have to do that one, right? And then there's something called federated services, which allows you to do true single sign-on. When a user is signed into their computer, they're also signed into Office 365. This is a total nightmare. It is like 5 or 6 servers. It's really a mess. Microsoft's documentation starts at 20,000 users. I don't recommend that to anyone. There's also Exchange Coexistence, which allows you to move mailboxes back and forth between Office 365 and Exchange on-premise. So just know that these integrations exist. Don't do federated services. Whether or not you want to do coexistence or directory synchronization depends on mostly how you want to migrate your data. So we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm just going to skip forward, and I'm sorry to those of you who have a lot of questions about that, but we can always come back to that if we have some time at the end. And I want to dive right into talking about migrating your email, calendars, and contacts to Exchange Online. So again, my goal for this presentation is to give you an idea of the different ways to migrate, the different processes, and help you understand whether or not you're ready to do this on your own. Okay, so important considerations for moving to Office 365 are which on-premise integrations you're going to use, so whether or not you're going to use directory sync or coexistence, what version of Exchange you're using, how many mailboxes you have, and are you willing to switch everyone over at once, a cutover migration, which is much easier, or do you have to do it sort of staged, a few at a time? And do you have an Exchange administrator or someone who can manage your existing Exchange server? So again, a lot of this is going to apply to to migrating from an on-premise Exchange environment. Some of it doesn't, and I'll go through some of that. Okay, you have two general types of migrations. There's a manual PST migration, okay, and that's where you literally export every mailbox to a PST from Outlook, and then you import that back into Outlook once it's been connected to Office 365. This is what we cover in our DIY workshop. It's what I would recommend if you have under 20 users. It's going to be much more cost effective for your organization. Then there's an automated migration. And manual PST migration is what you're going to have to do if you're already using Outlook and you're popping for your mail. If you're pulling your mail into Outlook, you're going to have to do a manual PST migration. An automated migration uses automated tools to move all your mailbox data, including often distribution groups, external contacts, and shared mailboxes. Everything sort of comes over automatically. Okay, so manual PST migration is best for under 20 mailboxes. You don't have to configure your server. That's a huge thing. Organizations that are under 20 users normally don't have $500 or $600 to spend paying someone to configure their server to work with the automated tools. You don't need very much technical background. It's very straightforward. The big caveat here is that your users have to have their email in Outlook, right? Which you can actually do with Google Apps using they have like a sync tool. Or with IMAP, or if you've been popping with your mail, you can get all that stuff into Outlook. An automated migration requires pretty significant, at least by some standards, server configuration, but it's really the only option if you have a lot of mailboxes, right? Because it's much, much, much faster. Users in an automated migration will already have their mail migrated before they start using Office 365, which can make the transition a little bit more straightforward. So I'm just going to go through the manual PST migration process, and then I guess maybe we'll try to stop for a moment and see if there's any questions about that manual process, and then we'll talk about the different automated options. Okay, so to do a manual PST migration, you'll set up Office 365. You'll get your domain verified, get the licenses, then you'll create user accounts for everyone and create distribution groups and all that kind of stuff. And then you'll flip your MX records, the DNS change that you make to send all your mail to Office 365. Again, if you don't know what DNS is and you don't have a consultant to help you, this might not be the right thing for you to be doing on your own. Then your users will start using Outlook Web Access for new email, and they'll just continue to use Outlook for old email, right? Their old email is already in Outlook. And then you'll go to each desktop and you'll do File Export in Outlook. You'll export their mail to a PST. You'll set up Outlook to talk to Office 365, and then you'll just re-import that PST, and that will push all their mail up to Office 365. Okay? This is by far the easiest way to get to Office 365. And I would really recommend it if you have under 20 users. And honestly, maybe even if you have under 50 users, depending on some other things. So do we have any questions about the manual PST process, or what do you think, Becky? Should we pause here?
I don't have any specific questions that are about the PST process. I've got lots of questions about Active Directories and single sign-on and stuff, but that's sort of bigger than PST and email.
Yeah, let's save that for the end. If we have some time, we can tackle some of those questions.
Oh, you know what? We had one that just came in really quickly that says, actually now a couple have just come in quickly. How well does the manual process for PST transfer work?
Oh, it works very, very well. I mean, everything that's in Outlook comes in exactly the same in Office 365. It's very, very reliable. Your contacts, your calendars, all that stuff. Yeah, same with shared mailboxes. You can export a shared mailbox the same way you export a normal mailbox. And the same with public folders.
Okay, and then we had Taya asked, all emails need to be cached on the computer. Ours are just stored on our Exchange server. Does that make a difference?
You can still export that mail to a PST, even if you're not using cached Exchange mode. You can just do File Export, so, select your mailbox, and it'll still send it all out to a PST. There are also some server-side tools that will allow you, one's called Xmerge. That's like a very old Microsoft-provided tool that still works, EXMERGE, that will let you export all your mailboxes to a PST straight on the server. And there's command-line PowerShell tools for newer versions of Exchange that do the same thing.
Okay, and we have a couple of people asking for a definition of what PST means, because that's a good point. We didn't actually say what it stands for, but that's your Outlook file.
yeah, let's actually see what PST stands for, because I have no idea.
I don't actually know either, but I know that it's the file type that goes with it.
Yeah.
There you go.
Personal folder storage. So it is a very, very old Microsoft file type that is used by Outlook to store all of your mailbox data, right? Your calendars, your contacts, your email folders, your sent items, all that stuff is stored in your PST. If you're not using Exchange, then all your data is already, but you're popping for your email, then all that stuff is already there. But otherwise, PST is just a format that Outlook can easily export to that captures all of that different, all of those different kinds of information.
Right. And so just like any other file type, like a .doc or a PPT for PowerPoint, PST is just the file type that they've named for your Outlook stuff altogether in a simple layman's term. Benjamin asks about PST, saying that they have 280 email accounts with IMAP web service. Would it be better to do the automated migration?
Yeah, you're definitely going to want to use the automated migration with 280. Well, at least I would if I was the manager. And we can talk a little bit about your options for doing that. And those options are also going to apply to Gmail, because Gmail also, the best way to get that data out is using IMAP.
Just a couple more questions on the PST, and then we're going to move forward. And again, we'll still have time at the end to do more questions. Doug asks, what if mailboxes are larger than 2 gigs?
That's fine. A PST can be more than 2 gigs now. It's not a problem.
Okay. And then we can still use an out-of-office assistant, correct? And that's a question from Judy.
Yes. Yeah, you absolutely can.
Great. And
that's
then,
all part of Office 365.
Okay. And then one other question, and we'll move on. And this is from James asking, will the Outlook Web Access be able to see old emails after the migration of your PST? So can you still access the old stuff? So if you migrate your stuff to Office 365 and you sometimes accessed it from Outlook Web Apps previously, will you still be able to see the old mail? Does it actually move the location of it?
Yeah, it moves that mail to Office 365. When you do that import, it actually gets that stuff over to Office 365.
Okay, so you wouldn't access it through the web app. You'd access it through Office 365. Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So I'm going to try to answer the question as I understand it, and then we can circle back. Yeah. So
I think they just wanted to make sure if their old email would still be accessible, and it sounds like it would. It would move over with the PST.
Yes,
transfer.
It moves over with the PST to Office 365. And then you can access it either in Outlook or in Outlook Web Access. It's the same thing either way.
Okay. Great. So let's go ahead and move forward. We have one more poll here, and we'll leave it up for a few seconds since somebody had let us know that it wasn't appearing on the screen. And then we'll move ourselves forward with some more interesting topics here. So go ahead and let us know what version of Exchange you're using.
Great. So while we're waiting for this, I wanted to just don't answer this question if you're not using Exchange on-premise right now. I just also wanted to mention, Ebony asked me to remind everyone that as far as the PST export, the data that's going to be included in that PST is whatever data is in Outlook, right? So if you are using IMAP and you're not using Outlook right now, you can get all your email into Outlook to export to that PST, but you're not going to be able to get your contacts and your calendars and stuff. So when you export from Outlook, anything that's already in Outlook will be in that PST. If you already have your contacts and your calendars in Outlook, great. If you don't, then that stuff won't come over with the PST, and you'll have to find another way to migrate that data. So hopefully that's helpful. Okay. So we have a lot of users. Do you think I've waited long enough? Are we ready to move forward?
Yeah, I think so. Feel free to keep clicking on the screen even if we show the results. We've only had about half of our participants have clicked, so I'm hoping that means that many of them either are not using Exchange on-premise or they're otherwise occupied. So feel free to keep clicking.
Great. So the kind of migration you can undertake depends on what version of Exchange you're using or which third-party tool you're using. And I will go through some of that stuff. I'm going to make sure to cover migrating from other systems as well. But it looks like most people are on 2010 and a lot of people are still on 2003. All of you organizations on 2003, you should move to Office 365 soon. There is no direct upgrade path to 2013, and I don't know how much longer Microsoft is going to keep supporting direct migrations from Exchange 2003. I mean, it might be for a long time, but it might not be. So just keep that in mind. There's a little bit of a time bomb there. Okay, so with all automated migrations, you're going to configure your server to be migrated. You're going to set up RPC over HTTP. If you're doing a staged or a remote move migration, you're going to set up directory synchronization. And I'll talk about what a staged and remote move migration is. If you're going to do a remote mailbox move migration, and I'll explain what that is, you're going to set up coexistence. And then you're going to migrate your data. With cutover migrations, you'll do every one at the same time, and I'll explain what that looks like. With staged migrations, you'll do a few at a time. So again, we've talked about the distinction between a manual PST migration and an automated migration. And now we're diving into the automated migrations, and we're going to talk about cutover migrations and staged migrations. Okay? So with a cutover migration, you'll configure your server, and you'll use the Microsoft Migration Tool. And that Migration Tool is going to automatically create all of your accounts and migrate all your mailboxes. Okay? After it's finished, so you'll start this migration 3 weeks before you're planning on using Office 365. After that migration is finished, so it'll sync all your on-premise mailboxes to the cloud. And then after that's done, it'll resync once a day. It'll look for changed items. So every day you basically have an exact replica in Office 365 of the data that's on your on-premise server. Okay? And then on the day that you pick, you switch your MX record so that mail starts going to Office 365 and your users start using Office 365. Right? And when they're in Office 365, they already have all their mail, all their calendars, all their contacts, all your distribution groups are there, all your external contacts are there. It's just immediate. Right? Everyone starts using Office 365. So cutover migrations are by far the easiest automatic migration to complete. Okay? Your other option here is a staged migration. With a staged migration, you'll configure your server. And again, which kind of stage migration depends on what version of Exchange and these things that you're using. And I'll go over that in a moment. You're going to migrate a few users' mailboxes and license those users, and then you'll get them using Office 365. So with a stage migration, you do like 5 or 10 users at a time, right? And then you get them set up, and they'll be able to send email back and forth with your local on-premise users, just email, not anything else, but they'll be able to send email back and forth. And then you'll just sort of migrate a few users at a time until you get into Office 365. If you have more than 300 mailboxes, you're probably looking at doing a stage migration. It's just too many. It's too many people to manage all at once. So that's an important thing to think about. Okay, so now we're going to look at this really, really complicated diagram. And I know this is overwhelming. I think, honestly, one of the messages I want to send to you is that if you want to do an automated migration, you should really know what you're getting into. It's very complicated. Okay? It's not that complicated to do a manual PST migration. I would think that most organizations can manage that. Some can manage it without any help. Some will need a little bit of help. But the automated stuff gets complicated. So along the top here, you'll see the different kinds of existing services that you already have. So if you don't have Exchange or you don't have an Exchange administrator, you can do a manual PST migration. This also applies to anyone who's using Outlook or anyone who can get their mail into Outlook, right, and wants to do a manual PST migration. If you're using Exchange 2003 or Exchange 2007, you can do a staged migration or a cutover migration. Okay? A cutover migration requires that you set up directory synchronization. There is no way around that. Okay, and directory synchronization is a little bit complicated to set up. That requires that you keep an Exchange server on-premise indefinitely. So I can talk about that if we have some time at the end, but I want to make sure I get through the bulk. If you're using Exchange 2010 or Exchange 2013, you can do what's called a remote move migration, which requires that you set up Exchange coexistence, which requires that you use directory synchronization. Okay? Remote move migrations are staged, right? You do a few mailboxes at a time. One of the big benefits of them is that people's Outlook will automatically get reconfigured. So after you move their mailbox, their Outlook will automatically know that their mailbox is now in Office 365. It will set itself back up. So it's a lot easier for you as an administrator. Okay? So these are sort of the 3 different migration paths available to you as Exchange 2013 users, or as Exchange on-premise users. If you have hosted Exchange or you are using another third-party service like that organization that had 280 users with IMAP, you can use a third-party tool like MigrationWiz or Skykick. These are both tools that will migrate data to Office 365 for you. These tools are not free. MigrationWiz is like $11.50 per user. Okay, that's not a negligible cost. But it will automatically migrate calendars and contacts and email from Google Apps to Office 365. It will do all of that for you. And it will migrate email from any IMAP provider. Same kind of deal. You can move all your mail there. With MigrationWiz, you can also choose to do either a cutover migration where you move everyone over at once, or a staged migration. It's up to you. You can do it either way. I know that's not a lot of detail there. A lot of that is sort of very specific stuff about what kind of migration path you're using. But hopefully that will give you a place to get started. The Microsoft Migration Tool, which is free, does technically support doing an IMAP migration. So if all you want to move is your mail, you may be able to use the Microsoft Migration Tool and connect that to IMAP service providers, but it's a little bit on the iffy, temperamental side. We see much better luck using MigrationWiz, but MigrationWiz is not free. Okay, so I'm sure we have a ton of questions. Let's just talk a little bit about when you might need help. So basically, if you are interested in doing this, but you're not so comfortable around the Office 365 interface, and you need help just sort of setting up accounts and that kind of thing, you might want to get some help. Maybe not from us, maybe from your existing provider. My guesses are that they're already doing some work with Office 365. If you want to do an automated migration, but you need help configuring your server, you're going to need someone to make those changes for you, right? If you want to integrate with third-party services like scanners or email archiving appliances or on-premise encryption appliances, you should probably get some help understanding the limitations and the features of Office 365 in that arena. Or if you're interested in doing a staged migration, a staged migration is in with Exchange 2003 or 2007, or a remote mailbox move migration with 2010 or 2013, I would really encourage you to get some help and make sure you understand the process, because it's very complex, particularly when you get into those different integrations. Okay, so this is a lot of information, and again, my goal here is not to help you just be ready to do that migration on your own right now. My goal is to help you decide on a path and get some more questions that you need answered and figure out what research you need to do. But with that in mind, I'd like to open up for some questions about email migrations.
Great. Yeah, we have a lot of great questions in here. So let's see. Let me scroll in here. We have questions about contacts for small business add-on for Outlook, and will the data in there move over? So if you're using a small business add-on, I don't know if that's too specific, but
I do not know the answer to that question. I'm sorry. If you can get that data into a PST,
we'll try and get that answer
can,
for you later. We can try and get that for you and respond after the webinar. Okay, let's see. We also have, quite a few people are just asking, we don't currently have an Exchange server. Everything is standalone. So does Office 365 make sense for us? And I know that's not specific to email, but kind of capturing that if they're not using an Exchange server at all, is it worth it to go to 365?
It's a huge benefit. So if you're not using an Exchange server at all, probably your email is in Outlook and you're popping for that email, or you're using IMAP to get that email into Outlook. And in that case, Office 365 is a huge benefit. For one thing, that data gets backed up to the cloud, right? So it all lives in the cloud rather than living on your local computer. So if something happens to your local computer, you don't lose it. For another thing, it's now synchronized. So you can access it in Outlook. You can also access it on your phone. You can also access it in a web portal, right? It's available from anywhere. It's a huge benefit of Office 365. You're actually in a really good place to go to Office 365 Because if your data is in Outlook, it's very easy to get into Office 365. You just do that PST export and import, right? It's very, very straightforward. So yeah, it's definitely worth it. All of those benefits of Office 365 apply to you, and you get all the functionality of an Exchange server in terms of sharing contacts and sharing calendars and access from anywhere.
Great. And then Taya asks, how long should you plan on it taking if you have to do a manual migration? And I know that can depend on how many email accounts you're moving and whether you have an Exchange server on-premise or not. But maybe in a couple of those scenarios you could give some type of estimate on how long it might take.
Sure. So a manual migration with fewer than 20 mailboxes I would expect to take between a week and 2 weeks. Right? And that's mostly because you have to push all that data up over your Internet connection. Right? So you'll import that PST and then you have to wait for all that data to sync online to Office 365, and that can take a little bit of time. And you have to go to each of those desktops and schedule all that. Ebony is telling me not that long, so I guess even it can be less than a week, depending on how much data you have and the speed of your Internet connection. Cutover migration is going to take probably about a week. I would give it a week to synchronize your data with Office 365. It probably won't take that long, but just for planning purposes. And then a week after that, you'll be ready to go. Stage migrations totally depend on the number of users you have. You can probably do 4 or 5, between 5 and 10 mailboxes at a time. And so it depends on how many mailboxes you have. So
Great.
So PST migration under 20 users, few days to a week. Automated migration about a week. Stage is sort of up in the air.
That's great. That's helpful, I think, to give people an idea. Tara asks, do you lose Outlook contact autofill lists? I'm not quite sure I know what that means, but
yeah, I know what that means.
Great.
Do you lose that list? The official answer is yes, you lose that list. And that's the official answer because it is kind of complicated to preserve that list, but it is actually possible to preserve that list. It's stored in a file that's on your local computer, and it's possible to rename that file in a way to save it. I'm not going to give instructions for doing that here, but if you do some Google searching, you'll find it. That is true with all versions of Outlook up to 2013. Outlook 2013 stores that data separately in a suggested contacts list, and I'm not sure there's a way to preserve that. You'll keep the contacts, but the autofill itself won't continue to work after moving to Office 365.
Okay, great. Benjamin asks, he says they have 280 IMAP accounts. Could you please briefly explain the free alternative to paid migration using MigrationWiz? Like, how does that work?
Well, yeah, you can use the Microsoft Migration tool. You go, you log into the Office 365 portal and you open up the Exchange Management portion and you go to the Migration tab. That's how you do all your Microsoft migrations. And you can do an IMAP migration from there, and you give it a list of all of your connection server, every email address, every username, every password for all of your IMAP, and then it will attempt to move your data over that way and do the migration that way. So it's possible.
Okay.
That's sort of the general process.
Good. That's great to know that it can do. Ken is asking, are there any problems with setting up smartphones and Exchange in Office 365?
No, it's all ActiveSync, standard ActiveSync. So yeah, it'll work the same way that it works right now. I haven't had any problems with phones. iPhones,
Terrific.
Android phones, Windows phones, all the rest.
That is great. So we have a number of questions coming in more around SharePoint. So why don't we go ahead and move on to the next section, which is about SharePoint, and then we can cover some of those. Thanks.
Okay. So I'd like to thank everyone for sticking with me through that portion. That's by far the most technical portion. We're going to ease into the SharePoint and the link and the OneDrive stuff. It's going to get a lot simpler from here. Okay, so let's talk about shared files in Office 365, and that's done with SharePoint Online. Okay, so SharePoint is really pretty straightforward. The migration is much easier. The setup is easier. Where it gets complicated is the minutia. The complexities of integrating between applications installed on your local desktop and applications, and the files stored in SharePoint. Like the stuff that I told you about 2010 technically working, but it being harder to open files inside from SharePoint than it is with Office 2013. That's one example of a small minutia that you really have to do the research to understand. There are also some strange and somewhat counterintuitive limitations, which I'll talk about a couple of those. And there are some architectural decisions that you're going to make. So one of the big things about moving to SharePoint is that your users are going to change how they're storing their data, right? They're not going to be doing it in the P drive in folders. They're going to be doing it in sites, and then there will be some subfolders and stuff like that, but it's going to be very different. So you have to make sure that you make smart decisions up front in order to allow your users to find the information that they're looking for. So I would ask yourself these two questions before embarking in a migration to SharePoint. Are you prepared to help your organization completely restructure its data store? Right? You're basically going to be, you can use what you already have as a template, but you're going to be recreating it and hopefully making some changes as you go along. And keep in mind, SharePoint is a big transition for your users. Right? I showed you Exchange Online, and I showed you Outlook, and I showed you Outlook Web Access, and those don't really look very different than the same thing that you're already using right now. Right? It's very different with SharePoint. With SharePoint, it's web-based. You're not going to your P drive anymore. It's a big change. And so you have to be prepared to walk your organization through that. There are a lot of benefits. I mean, it works from anywhere. It's actually Internet accessible. Right? A lot of benefits, versioning, all kinds of things. But it is a big transition. So just be ready for that. Okay. So the general process, this is the process that we use when someone comes to us and says, help us move to SharePoint. We start by introducing everyone to SharePoint. Right? It's very important that people see SharePoint from the very beginning. It's a very big change, and they will not absorb it if they see it only after everything's built. Then you create a sitemap, and the sitemap is going to determine which sites you're actually using, and I'll talk about the structure of SharePoint in a minute. You'll determine the permissions and the applications available on each site. You'll build everything, and then you're going to migrate data and you're going to train people, and you're going to do those two things as close together as possible. Okay, so this is sort of a general process. I'll talk about how to migrate the data. I want to talk a little bit about the architecture of SharePoint. So SharePoint is divided first into site collections. Site collections are sort of like a very broad category. It's an umbrella. And a site collection can have up to 1 terabyte of data in it. You can have multiple site collections. Site collections have multiple sites underneath them, and sites are organized in a hierarchical manner, and so they can have subsites. And then under that you have apps, and apps are where you actually store your data. So that's documents and calendars and contact lists. So if I share my screen here just for a moment. So this is SharePoint, and let's open up our team site here. So here you can see SharePoint. Along the top we have a bunch of links. Each of these is a site. Okay? So each of these sites has different permissions. Like not everyone can get into the restricted HR folder, right? And then some of those sites have sub-sites. So here we have Cloud Services, and then we have a self-service folder under that. What we're doing right now is part of that offering, right? Infrastructure, we have some sub-sites under that. And again, each of these can have different permissions. On the left-hand side, you can see the apps that are available in this particular SharePoint site. So right now we're in the home site, and here I have documents, I have a PTO calendar, I have expense reports, right? If I go into the Cloud Services site, the items on the left-hand side change. Now we have documents and projects and a notebook. Right? So these are the apps that are added to SharePoint, and these are the sites that are in SharePoint. Okay? So just sort of as a broad overview. Again, I'm not trying to, it's not going to be enough information for you to just run with, but hopefully this sort of gives you a little bit of an idea. Okay, so keep in mind, particularly about introducing users to SharePoint, SharePoint is very different than Map Network Drives. Know that going into it. Designing a SharePoint site requires that users be able to speak SharePoint. So you're going to have to, again, introduce them to SharePoint very early on in the process so that when you're going through this design process, the sitemap building process, all that stuff, they have some idea of what you're talking about when you say apps or when you say sites. Right? Make sure they can speak that language. And again, I know I've said this 8 times, but it's absolutely the most important thing. Don't let users see it first time when they're actually starting to use SharePoint. It will not be successful. It's really, really important. You'll get a lot of pushback. SharePoint's a big change. for users, and you really need to be careful about how you introduce it. When you create your sitemap, make sure you create the fewest sites possible. So up what I had on the top, with all those drop downs, all those different sites, that's probably more sites than you should have in your SharePoint environment. Right? The more sites you have, the harder it is to find the information that you need. So create as few sites as possible. And really the benefit of that is just making sure that people know exactly where to go to get information and know exactly where to save information. Also consider users' workflows and integration with Office. Don't make them go through 8 different layers of sites in order to find the document that they want inside of Office. Right? Just keep in mind how they're actually going to use SharePoint. And then remember limitations. So one important limitation is 5,000 items per document collection that you want to sync with your local computer. So I showed you OneDrive. I showed you that client that can synchronize files with your local computer. You can use that same client to synchronize files that are in SharePoint, in sort of the shared portion of SharePoint, but only if there's fewer than 500 documents in a given document app. Right? So if you want users who are going to be using Photoshop or Illustrator to be able to synchronize those files with SharePoint, you need to put all those files in a Document Center app that has fewer than 5,000 items. So again, this is where knowledge of these limitations becomes important for properly architecting things. That limit, by the way, I expect to go away sooner rather than later, but it hasn't yet.
So Sam, we're running a little bit late here. We have just a few minutes left in the webinar. So I want to just try we're going to send everything out to everybody afterwards. So you will be able to look at all of the great resources on the slides, even if we don't get to cover them all. But if we can skip through and just cover some high-level other points on the remaining sections, then we can hopefully get to the end. And I know we're still trying hard on the back end to answer your questions.
Sounds good. I mean, we're really mostly done here. SharePoint is not that complicated a beast. As far as the migration goes for SharePoint, one of the best tools to use is a tool called Files to Go. It's relatively inexpensive, and it allows you to easily push all your files up to SharePoint. The Microsoft provided tools are pretty abysmal. I would not recommend that you use them, but Files to Go is $200. It's really pretty inexpensive. And again, make sure you do the training and migration as close together as possible. So again, if you need help with SharePoint, think about if you need help configuring SharePoint, and also if you need external help just managing a very complex change for your organization. That's really, really important. This is more complicated for your users than moving to Exchange. Okay, so we're getting there. Let's talk a little bit about moving to OneDrive. The process for getting your files moved up to OneDrive is really very easy. You just train users on it, and then you install the OneDrive client on the local machine. And then they'll just put their files in that folder, and it'll sync up to their personal OneDrive folder. So that's really all very straightforward. I don't think that any of you will need help moving to OneDrive. It's very, very straightforward. Link is also very, very straightforward. I have all 3 slides about that. The one thing to keep in mind is that for a lot of stuff you need the Link client. There's a free basic version of the Link client which you can download through Office 365. It doesn't allow for OneNote sharing or like a video gallery view where you can see multiple people's faces at once. For that you need the Link 2013 Pro client, which is included with Office 2013 Professional Plus through TechSoup or if you have the E3 licenses. So just keep that in mind. Again, you don't need our help for that. And that's really it as far as covering sort of a broad overview of moving to Office 365. Becky, do you want to take over?
Sure. So we have just a couple of things really quickly that we want to make sure that I'm going to bring Allie on the line because she's going to go ahead and show us quickly how to get it so that you know where the donations are accessed for the E1 and the E3 versions. So she's going to show us some screenshots. Welcome, Audrey, or Allie.
Thanks, Becky, and hello everyone. I just wanted to jump in, and it looks like many of you have signed up for a free trial, but I just wanted to clarify a few points where we've noticed some folks getting hung up in the process. It's fairly straightforward, but again, I just wanted to clarify a few areas. This is the activation page where you set up your account. Again, once you reach this page from the Microsoft page, you will start filling out these various fields, your country, first and last name. I just wanted to point out this will be the name of the primary contact in your account and should be the actual name of someone at your nonprofit organization in order for us to validate your nonprofit status. And then next, fill out your email address, which Microsoft will use to send you important account information. That email address, to note, should be associated to both the name you entered above as well as your organization. So paying attention that it's not a personal email account like Gmail or Yahoo. And then you will go ahead and fill in your contact information, address, the organization's address, city, state, zip code. And then once you've filled out your organization's information, you'll create your user ID. And as Sam mentioned, this will be the permanent name associated to your organization on your account. And then go ahead and create a password that is secure using upper and lowercase as well as numeric numbers and characters. And then here Microsoft requires you to verify your phone number by either receiving a verification code via text message or a phone call. And then once you set up your account, you will be sent to verify your domain status, which to continue to activate your nonprofit trial, you don't need to actually verify this at this time. You can verify it later. So we would recommend you skip it so that you have access to the back-end dashboard of your Office 365 Admin Center. And from this Admin Center, you'll have access to the support section to find out your validation status. You'll view your account settings, assign licenses, do product configuration, and access resources. So that's basically kicking off your setting up your account. The only other thing to note is that once you put in your organization's email address, the address, and personal name on the account, you will receive an email, and from within that email you actually have to click a link that activates your account. So it's kind of a two-step process. Once you set up your account, to activate it, go in and click the email confirmation sent to you from Microsoft. And there you go. That sets up the active trial account of Office 365 for nonprofits. Becky, back to you.
Thank you, Allie. So we are at the top of our finish time right now. So I'm going to go ahead and just show a couple of slides of additional resources. We are still plowing through some of the questions on the back end. So if we haven't answered yours, we're doing our best. But we would invite you to join us in our community forums at TechSoup.org/community, where you can post additional questions, and we'll do our best to have experts like Sam and Ebony and other folks on our end answer those. So these links you'll receive in the slide deck later on this afternoon in the follow-up email. This is the link to where you can see the different options and the comparison between the E1 and E3. It also mentions that there's a small business version coming soon, so that will be updated once that becomes available. This is the link where you can request a free trial. There's an FAQ to help answer more of your questions. And then we have some articles and webinars that we've presented here at TechSoup to help you determine if you're ready for Microsoft's Office 365. We did that overview webinar in the fall, and then we also did one on determining whether it was the right move for your nonprofit. So we'll include links to those. Additionally, Tech Impact, who we are very happy to have on the line with us today, has some offers that can help you evaluate whether it makes sense for you. They have a $10 assessment that you can get through TechSoup's donation program. So they're offering a phone conversation with you for the bargain price of $10, where you can consult about your specific organizational needs and requirements, and they can help you decide if it makes sense beyond the the information shared in this webinar. And they also have a DIY series. So these workshops that are available, they have a series that is available for smaller organizations with less than 20 staff and one that's for larger organizations. And this is a series of webinars that they present that walk you step by step through what we've overviewed today. And so they have a series of them for these 2 different org sizes, and then a separate one that's just on SharePoint migration. So if those are of interest to you, definitely check those out for $300 for the admin fees for these different workshop series. It's really quite a bargain compared to what you would pay a consultant to do for you. And that's if you feel like you can go through the process yourself but may need a little bit of extra help to walk through, that they make those available. And you can find all of those donation programs available through TechSoup.org/tech-impact. And again, they're a nonprofit, as are we, and so we really are trying to make them available at the most affordable price point for you, so that if you need to do it yourself, you have the resources like Sam and Ebony to walk you through. So we've gone through our time at this point, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up. But again, join us in our community forums where you can continue to ask questions and get them answered, and see threads that are already existing about people who've gone through this process and share your expertise. I'd like to thank Sam and Ebony from Tech Impact for helping give this really meaty presentation on Office 365 and how to do it yourself. I hope that you'll walk away knowing whether or not you can really broach it on your own with your technical staff on hand, or whether you may need a consultant or you may need some other resources to pull in order to make that work for your organization. I'd also like to thank John Rush and Ali Bezdikian, who've helped on the back end to answer your questions and gather them. I'm sorry we didn't have time to get through all of them today. Even with 90 minutes, Office 365 is a big product to cover. And I'd like to lastly thank ReadyTalk, our webinar sponsor, who provides this platform for our use to present webinars like this on a weekly basis. Please join us again. We have webinars coming up on everything from how to teach Internet safety if you run public computing centers, to how to develop strategies for CRMs, the constituent relationship management. So please join us for those, and you can find more information on our website. And take just a moment when you leave this window to complete our post-event survey that will continue to help us improve our webinar program. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a terrific day. Bye-bye.